you buy Australian, it might come as a surprise to hear that there are only a handful of Aussie food companies who are 100% owned and operated in Australia. On today's episode of The Nutrition Couch, we share the handful of Aussie brands out there and the healthy products that we like to buy from them. Hi, I'm Leanne Ward.
And I'm Susie Burrell.
And together we bring you The Nutrition Couch, the weekly podcast that keeps you up to date on everything that you need to know in the world of nutrition. As well as Aussie supermarket brands, we chat everything that you need to know about supermarket foods that may contain MSG. We have another delicious dip to share for party season, and our listener question is all about swimming. No, salt. It's all about salt.
It's S's. It's the same, isn't it, Leanne? And you haven't even been to Melbourne Cup, so you're not even hungover.
Same thing. No, I'm fresh as a daisy. I'm caffeinated. It's all good things today.
You're looking very sprightly on your video all of a sudden. She's got it down pat. Someone's obviously mucked up the script. That's me. But yes. You can ad-lib because you're a podcast professional. So
well,
no
I
drama.
remember the S. I just got the wrong S. So swimming is on next week's podcast. It's all about salt on this week's podcast.
It is.
But
it is
speaking
indeed.
of S's, with Aussie brands, there's a couple that begin with S as well. So I think we had a listener question about this, didn't we? Like, what are a handful of the Aussie brands that we can actually support in supermarkets? Because, you know, it's one thing to go down to the local farmers markets and support local, and we love to do that. But the reality is that we do the bulk of our shopping for the household at the supermarket. Like, there's really not much, we can't really get around that. So where there are Australian brands that we can support, we absolutely love to, don't we, Susie?
I think it's always alarming when you hear some sort of stat is like 90% of supermarket products come from a handful of brands. They're owned by massive multinationals, and for better or for worse, that's the way of a capitalistic society. But there are still a handful of Australian-owned and produced brands. Now, in saying that, a lot of big brands will still produce here in Australia. You know that we've got access to great manufacturing and raw ingredients here, but they may not be owned. So the ones we're going to go through are owned, 100% Australian-owned and manufacture and produce here. And I think that the standout feature to me, and I just love it as a concept because it's not, obviously this is a nutrition podcast. It's not about the nutritional specifically. I think it all makes us feel good to buy and support Australian. And I think what we do see, though, is some really top quality foods being produced here, and long-term larger companies do like to buy them because they're very good. The issue, of course, is sometimes that gets diluted in bigger industries, but they are certainly standout brands, and I feel very strongly that we should support them when we can. You know, it creates jobs. We know the qualities there of Australian produce. It's a feel-good thing, but it will be a shock to hear how few there are. But these are the ones that stand out both for being Australian owned and operated, but also stand out nutritional properties. So the first is Carmen's Fine Foods, which is headed by Carolyn Creswell, and probably some of the best mueslis and snack bars. They've also sort of branched out into popcorn. So Carmen's, despite its size, remains 100% Australian owned and operated, and certainly standout cereals in the supermarket section, which is dominated by other big companies. I should, of course, say Sanitarium. Sanitarium's not in my list, actually, but Sanitarium, of course, in the cereal section is, and hence, Australia's number one cereal is Wheat Bix, but they also produce some amazing plant-based milks that are fortified with essential nutrients. They produce some amazing vegetarian and meat alternatives, which are very rich in nutrient quality, nut spreads. So Sanitarium is another one that is an outstanding nutritional profile. Cobram olive oil has been around for only just about 20 years. They started with their olive trees, and the Australian extra virgin olive oil is top quality, extremely high in antioxidants, and certainly the only oil that I use in cooking. A smaller company is Twisted Healthy Treats. So they are original frozen yogurt cups, and they've branched out more into some lower carb and some ice blocks for kids. Very strong and growing Australian company that we love to support. Bulla Dairy is 100% Australian owned and operated, and they've got a really wide a portfolio of products, including those amazing ice creams. You know, you can get those mini frozen yogurt sticks as well as proper ice cream. Of course, dairy, things like cottage cheese as well. Mavers, nut spreads, you know, there's a really wide range of those 100% nut-based products. That's a great company too. Sunrise is also Australian. You know, they've got a wide and growing range of rice and also grain-based products in supermarkets. So that's one you can be assured is locally produced. One that surprised me actually, and I hadn't known, is San Remo. San Remo pasta is also 100% Australian, even though it sounds very Italiano, but that is an Australian pasta company. Bickford's cordials, so they've got also a range of low sugar alternatives. So, and I think juices as well. I think Bickford's do the pomegranate juice and the blueberry juice, which are really strong nutritionally. So that is, and also SPC. So SPC do baked beans, and they do a range of tinned fruits. So it's a small, how many is that, Leanne? It's like 10 we've named. It's not many. Of course, there's some more sort of smaller brands that are growing, you know, some of the boutique ones that are in the health food section. But I've picked those just because they are kind of major brands that frequent our shopping trolley. And you might now think, actually, when I am going to buy some ice cream, I will buy Bulla, you know, if I can, or I will choose Bulla dairy over others because knowing now it is Australian. And I think I'm sort of, it's always shocked and surprised and almost disappointed that there's so few, but at least they do span most of the grocery section in supermarkets. So a lot of that you can support in major kind of industries overall.
Do you want to know a fun fact about SPC?
I do. Tell me, Leanne.
So
I'd love a fun fact.
it's the last remaining Australian-owned fruit and vegetable processor, and it's been in operation since 1918. So fun fact. And then I have a fun fact about Sanitarium for you too.
Oh, I love it too. I love a fun fact.
So up in Brisbane, you were here last time. We were going to get a cheeky Starbucks on our way down to our retreat in Kingscliff, which was amazing as well.
Amazing.
And I said to you, I was taking you down there and we drove past the Sanitarium factory in Maruka. And I said, like, when it's cooking day, like when they're making the wheat bix, if you put the windows down, you can just smell like wheat bix through the whole suburb. And on the Facebook, like the Maruka grapevine, everyone always says it's wheat bix day or it's baking day because you can just smell it. It smells amazing. But Sanitarium, it is 100% Australian owned, but it's a not-for-profit organisation that is actually owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So the ownership structure means that the profits are actually reinvested back into things like community programs and health initiatives rather than actually being distributed to as like profit to shareholders. So that's a really nice one to support because they actually do a lot of great like health initiatives and community programs. Is not just going to a board of, you know, investors and shareholders who are just like lining their pockets. It's a good one. They do a lot of good cereal and stuff as well. So yeah,
they've also got an amazing nutrition team because the cost of food is high and profit margins are so tight in supermarket. It's really hard for brands and products to survive. And that's why you might have seen that new products can last as little as 3 months on a shelf because that's all they're given by major supermarkets to basically sell very quickly. So they're under huge amounts of pressure. So as such, many will not have an in-house dietitian because they just can't afford the budget spend. They've got to allocate that to marketing budget and things are really tight. But Sanitarium have always invested heavily in nutrition education. So they've always had a big team of dietitians on board, producing and providing a lot of recipe and resources for the community. And the reason their plant-based milks stand out, as do their veggie replacements for products, is that they're often fortified with essential nutrients because they know the benefit of that for people who are choosing to follow a plant-based diet. So, you know, they do reinvest certainly in nutrition to help the health of Australians. And I don't want to say that it has to be Australian to be healthy because that is not the case. But what I will say is that Australian foods are often superior nutritionally in many different ways. You know, we've got really high quality standards. Our raw ingredients are strong. And I can safely say that I think every one of those brands that I've mentioned, if they're not 100% healthy, a significant component of their portfolio is, and they stand out nutritionally. And so we have to support them, Leanne, because otherwise what happens is they disappear and everything become owned by big multinationals and it dilutes the nutritional quality. And something we were talking about at the retreat, which had an amazing group of women come from all over Perth, as far as Bundaberg, Tasmania, like just a gorgeous group of women ranging in age from in their 30s all the way up to almost 80. And they were just having such a great community time together because you and I love to get out with our listeners because most of the time we spend behind a screen. So it's always good to get some energy from some of our listeners who are so supportive. But we were showcasing different breakfast cereals, and I won't name and shame brands, but we brought out a couple of brands and we were comparing, say, a couple of the Australian options versus maybe maybe a couple of multinationals, and the difference in the quality of the ingredients and the list of the panel, because those companies are deeply committed to providing healthy and nutritious and tasty foods for Australians. Whereas unfortunately, the bigger the companies get, they sometimes gets diluted in the big structure of big business and profit. So there's many benefits that come from supporting Australian industry. And if I was taking it a step further, I would be encouraging there to be significant subsidies for Australian companies who produce healthy food in Australia to encourage them to be competitive and remain so in supermarkets. But that's broader legislative changes, but that's ultimately what we need to encourage small providers and help them to remain in a very competitive supermarket space.
And I've got a couple more to add to the list. So Rosella, so that's like, do you remember the tomato sauce back in the day? So it's Australian owned. It was actually, there was a period of foreign ownership when I looked into it, but it has been Australian owned since April 2013. So if you like your good Aussie tomato sauce, that's a good one, as is the Berenberg. So that's 100% Australian owned and operated too. They do a lot of like sauces, jams, chutneys, condiments. Yep. Norco is another Australian owned dairy co-op since 1895. Norco has been Australian owned. And then there's a lot of smaller dairy brands where if you go to, the select cheese sections, there's Mullaney Dairy, that's a Queensland-based one. There's the Barumba Organics. There's Bannister Downs Dairy in Western Australia. There's Gippsland Jersey in Victoria. The Barossa Cheese Company in South Australia. South Coast Dairy on the New South Wales South Coast, and Ashgrove Dairy in Tasmania. So there's some of the smaller dairy ones, and it might be location or state specific, but really good if you do see these smaller ones. Like for me in Queensland, like whenever I see a Mullaney Dairy, we do try to support that because it does have really great quality. So there's some of the smaller dairy ones, but certainly if you're in that condiment sauce kind of chutney aisle, the Rosella and the Berenberg are really good Aussie brands to support.
Look at you doing so much research, putting me to shame today before we popped on.
A couple of fun facts.
Yes, exactly. Very good. Let's see how much you know about MSG now. Let's go.
A little bit more. Okay, you want me to run the MSG section? All right, let's go. All right, so MSG, what is it? It is a natural flavour enhancer. And I think we have a little bit of a different stance on this because MSG, I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap in the media particularly because it is actually something that is natural. I think a lot of people think MSG is just this really bad, negative thing to add to food, but it's simply just a flavour enhancer. It's made from glutamate, which is an amino acid, and it is actually naturally found in foods. So glutamate occurs in really highly flavoured foods, things like mushrooms, cheeses, tomatoes. There's even glutamate in breast milk as well. So MSG is just the sodium or the salt form of glutamate. And so your body metabolizes it basically in the same way that it would metabolize natural glutamate from food. And on an Australian label, MSG is labelled as what's called a flavour enhancer, or you'll see the number 621 on an ingredient list. So if you pick up a product and it's got the number 621, that essentially means that it contains a flavour enhancer or MSG. So there has been decades of research around MSG and multiple reviews from big, things like World Health Organization, FSANZ, the US FDA, and multiple reviews have concluded that MSG is actually safe at normal dietary intakes. There is a component of what you would call MSG sensitivity, or what, some people term Chinese restaurant syndrome, where people say that all of that added MSG will give them symptoms. I certainly feel like I get mouth ulcers when I eat too much, or I do when I eat too much MSG. I've had other people say that they get, really fatigued. They might have itchy skin. They might have weird things happening with their breathing. So there's certainly what people would describe as an MSG sensitivity. But when you actually deep dive the research, it's really interesting, Susie, that it never comes up, like this supposed MSG reaction. When they've actually done clinical trials, they've done blinded studies, they've done placebos, people, they can't experience the MSG reaction the same throughout the entire trial. They only seem to experience a reaction when they know that they've been given a food with MSG in it. So it isn't actually scientific, I guess, or in clinical research trials, this whole MSG sensitivity, it's more anecdotal. And I can't say that I'm making up that I get mouth ulcers when I eat too much MSG, but I certainly feel that anecdotally, a lot of my clients, from a lot of what I hear, some more sensitive people don't seem to do too well with too much MSG. So the issue isn't MSG, because MSG actually contains about 2/3 less sodium than table salt. And it actually has this really nice, like umami type flavoring. So it actually helps helps to enhance the natural flavor of a meal. And so that's why I think food manufacturers use it, is to really just enhance the flavoring of the meal. So MSG in itself isn't inherently harmful or bad. The issue is that it's added to a lot of like ultra processed snacks, chips, biscuits, instant noodles, soup, sauces. And a lot of these products are quite poor nutritionally, and MSG tends to drive overconsumption of the food. So the real issue, I feel, isn't MSG. It's the ultra-processed foods that it's added to and the amount at which people tend to consume those types of foods. So when people ask me, if you wanted a black or white response, is MSG bad? My response would be no, if you ask me. But I would follow that up with the caveat that, but MSG happens to be added to a lot of ultra-processed foods, and that in itself isn't great from a health perspective because we tend to overeat it. Because it is so highly flavored that we do tend to eat far more than what an average serving size is. And I know that we have kind of differing views around this, but would you kind of agree with that? Or you're kind of a blanket hard MSG no, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that adding MSG to food promotes overconsumption. That's the issue, because it's not in the same context, because it's naturally occurring in, say, mushrooms, tomatoes. It's literally, I would argue, impossible to overeat in its natural form. So I disagree even with that, okay, because the other place we get it is when we eat cuisines, which is high. So one of the highest is Asian cuisine, because they'll use a lot of sauces and the sauces have a lot in it. So soy is naturally a very rich source of glutamates, and we tend to have it across multiple dishes, and then you might also use fish sauce or oyster or hoisin. So it's very, very high in salt in general, but high. And I think it is easy to eat that kind of food because it basically primes the brain like a drug. It lights up and just loves it, and the more the better. So the issue, when I'm communicating about MSG, I will say added MSG is a problem to food, because if you look at all of the foods that it's added to, typically corn chips, 2-minute noodles, shapes, and foods that masquerade as being healthy, like those harvest piece snaps, which often people would think are very healthy because they're masquerading as vegetable chips, a healthier alternative to potato chips, when you're actually better to have a plain Red Rock Deli potato chip that's got potato, salt and oil. And that's what studies of consumption have shown. So the biggest issue is that it's in foods that you wouldn't expect to have that ingredient. So there's no chicken in 2-minute noodles. There's no cheese in shapes. There's no chicken in chicken crimpies. Like, it's in those foods that shouldn't naturally occur. And so studies will show that when people are exposed to it, they keep eating. And that's why I have to be careful, because I don't want to get sued. But my understanding is Doritos don't have added MSG, but CCs still do. So you might see it as flavor enhancer 621, but also 635 is just as bad in the sense it's still enhancing the flavor of something that's not naturally inclined. So the studies would suggest that if you sat down with some plain corn chips we would use for nachos, the ones that are good quality that just have corn and oil and salt, versus say something like a CC's, you would eat a lot more CCs just because of that moreish feeling. And the other big issue I have with it, it's in a lot of kids' foods. So foods that we're encouraging or are often marketed to children, like packets of shapes for the kids' lunch boxes, the harvest piece snaps, the corn chips, they've got it. And a lot of flavoured chips like cheese and onion, chicken chips will have it in. So I think that there's a lot to be said for kind of avoiding it as an additive. And it is one of the additives I generally avoid. If I'm buying potato chips, corn chips, I will go out of my way to not give that to the children, because I think that in a society which it's so easy to overeat all the time, it's an additive that I think isn't great. Now, you're right, there's not huge evidence to show it's dangerous or negative. There's no evidence to show it's dangerous, but some people will report side effects, like they might be restless and they'll just describe it as Chinese restless syndrome and after Chinese food or any cuisine that has that dose. So I think for parents listening or for listeners thinking about additives in their diet, I think avoiding it on processed food is important. So potato chips, the 2-minute noodles, like the rice crackers, they're the main ones that come to mind. But even dumplings. So some dumpling brands will include it, whereas I tend to go for Mr. Chen's, which is another Australian company actually, because they don't include added. And you'll see that on the label. It will say no added MSG, because it's the additive as a flavour enhancer in concentrated amounts that's an issue for volume and feeling satisfied after eating.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, I think bottom line is it's not a villain, but it isn't great if, the goal is to cut down on how much ultra processed food you're consuming. And we know, like, if you could give your kids, a plain corn chip or like a highly flavored, triple cheese type of corn chip, it's just basic, common sense that you don't want to give your kids highly flavored things because you get that sticky, cheesy stuff all over their fingers for one. And secondary, they do tend to eat a lot more of it and they tend to be a lot thirstier. It's very salty. So I think for young children in particular, the blander the food, the better when it comes to packet-based food because, we really just don't need as much salt in our diet. And that is a listener question coming up. So we won't go any further on added
but
salt.
But I just have a list. Let me read out my list because I just had an article on it for people who want a food list. So foods where you'll find it. So the shape flavors specifically, chicken crimpy and nacho cheese, 2-minute noodles in general, both beef and chicken, twisties, both cheese and chicken, Smith's chips specifically, barbecue, chicken, cheese and onion and meatball. Oh my God, there's a meatball chip.
A meatball flavored chip? What?
Crazy.
Where have I been all this time?
I am a cheese and onion fan, so this is upsetting. Pringles sour cream. So if you're going to eat Pringles and you pop and you can't stop, go for plain. The Mission Mexican corn chips, which I have to say are delicious, but they are smothered in
That's
cheese flavor.
disappointing. I've bought them before. Okay.
CC's and then Doritos don't have 621, but I think they have 635, which is also a flavor enhancer. Chicken in a biscuit, that's a good old 90s favorite. The Delights rice snacks. Now, I've noticed myself that in the rice cracker section, a lot of the brands have removed it, but the Delights brand, which have both in the box the flavored kind of crackers and the tray of rice crackers still have it in, and the Harvest Snaps, particularly the chili has 621, I believe, whereas the plain only has 635. So, yeah, that's sort of a summary point. It is only a handful of foods, and let's be honest, they're probably foods we wouldn't be encouraging people to have a whole lot of in general. But if you're having a kids' party, actually my kids went to a kids' party last week, and my child came home and advised me that he'd had 3 cups of full-strength Coke. I was not impressed. So, I think parents who are having parties, you can get naturally sweetened drinks now. You can get plenty of snack foods that are slightly better. Get plain chips, if you can avoid feeding heaps of other kids that food, I think it's quite a good thing too.
Yeah. All right. Mm-hmm. On to bigger, better things.
Sorry, I'm making you do the whole thing because you found a good dip. So I will lead in because usually if someone said to me to have a tomato dip, like a salsa, I'd be like, oh, boring. Like no one wants to eat salsa. Like, let's be honest. But you showed me this dip I hadn't seen. I've got it here actually on camera. This brand I hadn't seen either. And I think it's actually a little bit confusing because it's called Moroccan Matboucha. But it comes under the brand Tahini Neri. That's the brand. So I feel it's confusing because I said to you, no, I don't like tahini when you showed it to me. And you were like, no, it's not tahini. And so I do think there's a little bit of messiness with the brand. But this is in Coles. And Leanne, when I went to buy this, you'll laugh. I went to buy it and I promptly dropped one on the floor and it went everywhere. It went all over. It went all over my shoes. It went all over the floor.
No.
So anyway, there's been quite a story. Anyway, I've got one home because it is amazing find, isn't it? How long have you known about this dip for?
I found it at Coles literally 2 weeks ago, just before you came up, and then we had it. Well, I didn't have it because I was a little bit unwell, and you had
that's
it,
right.
And you said it was really good. So the brand is Tahini Neri, and they do I think a tahini based version of it because I bought that one and then the tomato based one. But the one we're going to showcase today is a Moroccan matboucha, and they say it's Matboucha is how you pronounce it. So Moroccan matboucha. And it's basically a chunky tomato dip. So you can scoop it, you can use it on like a sandwich, you can use it on a wrap. It's quite versatile. And when I picked up the ingredient list, I was shocked. And not a lot of products in the supermarket these days shock me. And they shock me for a good reason, which is what we like. Because when you read the ingredient list, it's 87% tomatoes, which is incredible. So if you don't like tomatoes, this is not your dip. Don't DM us on Instagram and say, what could I sub the tomatoes for? That there's no substitute. This is a tomato-based dip. If you're not into tomatoes, this isn't your thing. Next ingredient is canola oil, garlic, salt, spices. That's it. Like you couldn't make a better dip in your home kitchen, basically. And tomatoes are pretty expensive as well. So I think this is a really good option. I picked it up on sale for $3.50, I think, which out of all of the dips on average is actually a really good price. And as I said, they did do like a tahini version of that, which I haven't tried yet, but I would think it's in my fridge upstairs. It's sort of similar to like a thicker kind of hummus type dip. So it retails, I found it in Coles. I'm not sure if it's in Woolworths. It's in a 200-gram tub, which is the standard like dip size. It's vegan, it's dairy free, it's gluten free. So it ticks all the boxes from kind of an allergy perspective. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, no, I loved
nutrition
it. And
information.
Oh, okay.
Showed you the nutrition panel.
Yeah, read the panel.
So per serving, which I imagine it doesn't say how
20
much.
grams, 30 grams, I think.
20, 30, yeah, so about 1 to 2 tablespoons.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has 91 kilojoules, so very, very low energy. We're talking 20, 25 calories per serve, half a gram of protein, 2 grams of carbs, basically no fat, only a gram of fat, and sodium, only 200 milligrams a serve, which is incredibly low for a lot of dips. And we're going to cover salt in a minute, but this is a very low salt dip as well. It does have some added salt, but salt is the second last ingredient. So that's sort of what you want to see in a nutrition information panel. So if the goal is weight loss, if you enjoy the cheeses and the processed meats and stuff on your platter, this is a good way to kind of balance it out with some added veggie sticks, because you could scoop it with veggie sticks, you could scoop it with crackers, or as we said, you could use it as a spread on sandwiches, on sourdough. Even if you're having like an omelette or some scrambled eggs in the morning, this would go really well with that as well. So it's very versatile and quite a, I'd say, balanced price point for, the average dip sale.
There's such a wide range of vegetable content of dips, ranging from like 88% for a good quality Abila guacamole to, as low as like 10, 12%, and mostly it's fat. So you really do have to have a good look at your labels. But the thing about this was not only was it incredibly rich in tomatoes, but it tastes good, because I think a lot of salsa is quite watery and doesn't have that sort of mouthfeel, whereas they've managed to get a really rich mouthfeel with the tomatoes. And we should also say that cooked tomatoes are especially rich in lycopene, which is a very powerful anti-cancer agent. So I will be using this all summer. I thought it was outstanding. I'm with you. I would love my clients to be adding this to their morning eggs, because I'm constantly saying, add some vegetables, not just avocado or feta, add some veggies in there. So it would go beautiful with omelette, with scrambled eggs. Mexican, you could use it as, a nutrient-rich type of salsa. So yeah, I think they've done a really good job, and it just goes really well with vegetables. So you still feel like you're having a bit of a treat and something indulgent with just superior nutritional properties to, I'd say, 90% of the dips that are out there. So yeah, I've only seen it in Coles as well, but it's a massive thumbs up for me. They do have a tahini. I don't love tahini myself. Leanne's going to try that and give us some feedback next week. But yeah, it was an excellent find. And it's just, as I said, you got to really look for the tomato one. It's not easy to differentiate. Just look for Moroccan on the label, but that's only small. The Matt Butcher is your sign you're onto the right one. Yes. All right. Okay, Leanne. Well, that leads us to our final segment, which is all about salt. Because I've had a few clients who have been distressed after weighing in and noticing that their weight has crept up 1 kilo or 2. And then when I deep dive what's gone on, inevitably they've had some salty food the day or day before. And, when we're doing a body weight, it's not measuring body fat. It's measuring just composition. If you have had a salty meal, you can retain as much as a couple of kilos of fluid. Even after, say, a heavy weight session, your muscles will retain more weight and more fluid, and that can bump it up. So, it really does affect it. And that's why having a gradual trend over time, or weighing, a couple of times a week to see the patterns. How much is too much? It's really hard, because some people are more salt sensitive than others. Some people can have bucket loads of salt. It doesn't have a negative effect. It's generally not good for us, because for some people who are salt sensitive, it may increase blood pressure, but that's not everyone. And certainly not even reducing salt will always reduce blood pressure. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But what I will say is that Australians in general have far too much. So it's recommended that we have less than 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day, but that is about, I think, how many grams of salt? I need to quickly check. But we're having about 8 to 10 grams of salt per day, when we should be having far, far less. So it's basically, if I'm looking at, that doesn't make a lot of sense at all, but in terms of amounts on food packaging, I am always looking for products that are no more than, say, 600-800, and the lower the better. So as soon as products are coming in over 1,000 milligrams, Leanne and I don't like it. It's too much. Knowing you've kind of got 2,000, maybe 3,000 a day to play with, and Australians are having, I think, 4 or 5,000 milligrams per day. We're having about double what we should be. So if you can stick to things that range between 300 and 600 milligrams per serve, you'll be on the right track. If you look at fast food and it's 2,000 the meal, that's the problem. It's those foods that are all over 1,000, which include things like pizza, soy sauce, 2-minute noodle bowls, processed meats like bacon are particularly high. Prosciutto is incredibly high. Smoked salmon is quite high as well. Now, you'd argue there's benefits to having that, but again, that's why we would say don't load up on too much smoked salmon, have a small portion and just be mindful it is a salty food. But I think the biggest contributor is fast and takeaway food, and also when we eat out at restaurants, because celebrity chefs might make food that tastes amazingly good, but they use bucket loads of salt to get there. And so the less you eat out and have that fried and fast food takeaway, the better. I think the other thing is that when you're seasoning at home, really try and use a range of different herbs and spices rather than just adding on the salt straight away. That's another trick to it. But there's some nuances with it. So for example, if you're having a vegetable soup and you add salt to it, and it's got 600-800 milligrams of salt, I'm not going to be worried because the benefits of the vegetables outweigh the salt. It's when you're not getting any nutritional value, you're not getting any fresh food with it, it's particularly the problem, which is why fast food and fried food is so bad for us coming into party season where there's a lot of that salty kind of canapes around. So yeah, it's sort of, you're looking at labels, anything under 300 is very low, 600 to 800 per serve is reasonable, and per day you've got 2,000, maybe 3,000 total to play with, but anything less than that is ideal.
So the recommendations for healthy adults are 2,000 milligrams of salt and no more than 5 grams of salt a day. Yeah. So it's roughly about a teaspoon a day. And I'm like if I have a client that has high blood pressure, that has issues with their kidneys, that for whatever reason needs to limit their fluid or retains fluid, I'm careful about salt. But if I'm being honest, Susie, I don't even blink at salt for 90% of my clients, because the goal of seeing a dietitian is to basically healthify the diet, right? Like we're cutting down on eating out, we're cutting down on takeaway foods. If they are eating out, they're adding a side salad, they're adding some more vegetables, they're consuming less processed and packet foods overall, and they're consuming more fresh foods. And that naturally takes out the bulk of the salt in the diet. So when clients say to me, can I add a little bit of salt to that recipe? Like it was really yummy, but it needed a bit of salt. I'm like, no problem. Like I rarely ever say to a client, oh, watch your salt, because I know that I'm actively trying to reduce it in all other aspects of their diet. But I would say for the Nutrition Couch listeners, probably the vast majority don't need to stress about salt at all, because they are, we're preaching to the converted, they're the healthy listeners. It's the other Australians who really don't listen to the Nutrition Couch that probably should be mindful of their salt intake, because they are consuming a lot of packet-based foods, a lot of bottles of sauces, a lot of takeaway type meals. So I think when, we're working with clients, we're not really that concerned because they're generally healthy. They just need some diet tweaks and we're adding in more fresh food. So I personally add salt to all of my meals. I don't really see it as an issue, but I do appreciate that if there are some medical conditions, it does need to be limited. And then I think as well, if you're exercising, you have a job where you're working in the hot sun, you live somewhere like Queensland, in summer it's quite hot, the more you sweat, the more you naturally actively need to replace some of that salt as well. So there's certainly nuances there, but I think on average, Australians aren't the healthiest bunch. So for the average person, they probably do need to be a little bit more mindful of their salt intake, but I would argue that the Nutrition Couch listener is far above the average health of most Australians.
Well, definitely we would say if you're having olive oil, balsamic vinegar and salt as your dressing, there's no cause for concern. Like it's make the salad taste good. And certainly having lived with Italians, Northern Italians, the buckets of salt that go in, but they have very little processed food and huge amounts of fresh food. So it's about the ratios. It's more important. And as I said, if you keep away from that middle aisle and really avoid the fried and fast food and acknowledge that occasionally when you do have an Indian or Thai takeaway, you are going to be a bit fluidy the next day, that's pretty good balance, which is always what we promote here on the Nutrition Couch.
We're all about balance. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. And if you know that your diet may need a little bit more protein or creatine or magnesium, you can go and check out our scientifically formulated range of supplements at designbydietitians.com. Thank you for listening. If you haven't checked out our brand new YouTube, there's also little shorts on YouTube as well. They're sort of similar to Reels on Instagram. If you want to go and have a little visual, increase in your knowledge along with the visual aspect, go and check us out on YouTube as well. We're just the Nutrition Couch on YouTube. Go give us a follow, go subscribe to the channel, and thank you for your time. We'll catch you on next week's episode.
See you next week.